Washington Post reports that during the late 1950s, the U.S. Army and the University of Maryland tested LSD on hundreds of civilians and soldiers, including some who did not know they were being given the drug. This is Doug Poling reporting on the CBS radio network. Getting ready for a handshake that will make history. All is going well right now for Thursday's docking of the Apollo craft carrying 3 astronauts and the Soyuz ship carrying 2 cosmonauts. It takes place a little more than 12 hours from now over Central Europe.
Continues to go well aboard the Apollo and Soyuz spacecraft as they prepare for tomorrow's docking. And in the meantime, our Russian interpreter, Harry Walsh, has a few linguistic thoughts on that docking.
Several hours from now, our American astronauts Tom Stafford, Vance Brand, and Deke Slayton are scheduled to dock their Apollo spacecraft with the Soyuz craft piloted by Alexei Leonov and Valery Kubatov. During docking and in subsequent meetings, the Apollo crewmen are supposed to speak Russian, while Leonov and Kubatov tackle English. In order to facilitate matters for those witnessing this memorable event, I'd like to explain some of the terms you might hear. The Russian word for docking is stikovka, but the actual docking interface is called a stick. If a secure dock is achieved, you might hear that the stick was well stuck in the stikovka. A stikovka takes place when the Apollo's docking module, or stikovachny modul, is mated with a docking ring attached to the Soyuz orbital module, or orbitalny modul. The device linking the 2 spacecraft is a simple but awesome-looking device called the Androgynous Peripheral Docking System, whose name in Russian is more awesome than the actual device, which is why the Androgini Periferini Agregat Stikovki is called APAS for short. If both spacecraft maintain their proper degree of kren, tangash, and riskania, or roll, pitch, and yaw, then the docking should go harasho, or well. The superbly qualified team of American teachers of Russian, under the direction of Anatoly Fedoshenko, have prepared their American charge as well. But the true test will come if a mechanical malfunction causes the docking module pilot, Deke Slayton, to come up with an appropriately expressive 4-letter Russian expletive. The unqualified success of this cultural exchange is threatened somewhat by the spoil sport attitude of NASA and the Soviet Academy of Sciences, who banned from the flight both Jack Daniels and Stolichная vodka, fearing that more brain cells are likely to be destroyed by the imbibing of spirits than by highly charged cosmic particles. But the therapeutic uses of vodka for loosening the tongue are well known. Can anyone seriously imagine that it's possible to reduce linguistic inhibitions with dried apricots, grapefruit crystals, thermostabilized cranberry juice, and rehydrated cocoa? David, pass me that glass of irradiated rehydratable monosodium glutamate.
And as I said, all continues to go well for tomorrow's stick. This is David Crane with Harry Walsh at the Johnson Space Center.
Now midnight, Lee Fisher's next. News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is George Caldwell, and at this hour, the Apollo is only a little more than 1,100 miles.
Off the coast of Chile, just below Santiago.
That's Bob Gordon at the Johnson Space Center. The 2 space crews are asleep right now. They'll be waking up in about 4 hours. The CIA linked to a Texas government agency. That story coming up. Spaceflight, the day of the rendezvous. But George Herman reports from CBS News Space Headquarters in New York that it started on a false note. The American astronauts were awakened early this morning by a trouble alarm indicating something wrong with their guidance system, a potentially serious problem in any attempt at docking with the cosmonauts. After a thorough study of the problem and some anxious queries by the crew, Houston had some reassuring words for Apollo.
Okay, we have fixed that all the way through, and it will not interfere with anything as long as the alarms are false, which is set
Similar false trouble indications had troubled Apollo-16. It was brought down a day early. But so far, this mission is described as being in good shape. Apollo is now flying lower and therefore faster and overtaking Soyuz at 108 miles an hour. It will fire 4 small engine burns to start station keeping and finally docking at around 12:15 Eastern Daylight Time. Now a look at the other Soyuz side of this mission from Steve Young in Moscow.
The Soviets are describing today as even more critical to the successful joint mission and the liftoff of Soyuz Tuesday or its scheduled return to the Soviet Central Asian desert next Monday. In fact, most of the maneuvering later today is performed by Apollo. The cosmonauts have little to do except wait for the astronauts to catch up with Soyuz. Then Soyuz will perform a roll maneuver to make it possible for a directional antenna on Apollo to beam its signal to an American communications satellite. That way, information on the rendezvous and docking will be available to the Soviet and American mission controls. The Soviets are looking forward to the link-up and the first opportunity for Russian Commander Alexei Leonov to shake hands with American Commander Tom Stafford. The high point of this symbolic mission will be what the Russians call Rukopozhatsye Kosmosie, a handshake in space. 2 other Soviet cosmonauts, Pyotr Klimuk and Vitaly Sevastyanov, are still in space aboard the Russian Soyuz space station. Last night, Soyuz Commander Klimuk referred to the 4 cosmonauts and the 3 astronauts as the Magnificent Seven. Steve Young, CBS News, Moscow.
Senator William Proxmire complains that this country's commercial television networks have become so enraptured, that's his word, with space activities like the Apollo-Soyuz flight that they have lost their objectivity. The Wisconsin Democrat believes they've fallen into the role of advocates of the U.S. space program and are too close to it to remain impartial. Proxmire says only public television has escaped this fault.
11:15 this morning and 2:17 this afternoon, Houston time, are the 2 moments of history for the Apollo-Soyuz Earth orbital mission. We now have this live report from the Johnson Space Center here in Houston with KTRH News reporter David Crane and Dr. Harry Walsh.
I just saw Don Putty, flight director, just about 2 minutes ago walking by our broadcast booth here, a smile on his face, cup of coffee in his hand. He just got off a late night shift from the Mission Operations Control Room. He's extremely satisfied with the way things are going. There was a warning light, woke up the crew fairly early this morning. The warning light was a false warning light. No problems at this time, and it appears to be very similar aboard the Soyuz spacecraft. Harry?
Yes, David. The Mission Control Center in Moscow is just announcing that everything seems to be okay. They expect to try to gain voice communication with Apollo in an hour and a half from now.
Very good, Harry. We're standing by here, Ken. David Crane, Harry Walsh at the Johnson Space Center. Again, it took less than an hour for mission control officials here to determine that that alarm was just a false alarm. It's not going to interfere with the docking procedures in any way, shape, or form. As a matter of fact, just about 2 minutes ago, we got word from mission control that they have just set up the corrective burn times for the Apollo spacecraft. There will be 4 very short bursts of the rocket system. This will bring the spacecraft into the rendezvous phase with the Soyuz spacecraft. The preliminary technique for that will be something along the lines of a station keeping. Once they are eyeballing each other, the final docking maneuver will take place using the quad rockets or the steering rockets on the Apollo command module for the docking phase. Everything is go at this time. During this docking phase, by the way, we will have some rather interesting conversations at the time because the Russians will be speaking English to the astronauts. Our astronauts will be speaking Russian to the cosmonauts. And earlier this morning, we taped this little piece of a sample of the English from the cosmonauts. Harry, I think I've got it. I'm not sure what he had, though.
Well, several times, David, in the last couple of days, the Capcom in Moscow has addressed the cosmonauts in English, and they've replied in English usually. And as you can tell, there may be quite a bit of difficulty involved in understanding the English as spoken by the cosmonaut. What he's doing there, basically, is that the Capcom is posing a riddle to Valery Kubasov. He's mentioning someone who he knows very well, sends his best wishes. He says he is the person who knows a lot about Alexander the Great and his airplane, whatever that means. And it turns out it's his friend Охотников, but it is a bit hard to catch.
Hopefully the communications will be somewhat better then through the ATS-6 satellite, the satellite some 22,000 miles above Africa that will permit so much more communications time with the two spacecraft. Question along those lines, though, Harry, if it's going to continue with that type of English, I wonder who we're going to have to translate the English into English.
Well, they'll also have to translate the Russian into Russian, so I guess we'll need more translators.
Russian with an Oklahoman accent.
At least.
It all continues to go well for the docking at 11:15. Again, the first crew transfer will be Tom Stafford and Deke Slayton. They'll go into the docking module shortly after around 1 o'clock. The procedures there. The final hatch open to the Soyuz spacecraft will be at 2:15. This is David Crane with Harry Walsh at the Johnson Space Center.
Houstonians will...
It's a stick, not a piece of wood. Well, when it is a Russian stick. I'm David Crane with Harry Walsh at the Johnson Space Center. Back with details in just a moment. We have just gotten word from Mission Control here that the Apollo spacecraft has just successfully performed the first of 4 corrective maneuvers to place that spacecraft into the proper orbit to do the rendezvous and docking with the Soyuz space.
Astronauts Tom Stafford, Vance Brown, and Deke Slayton are scheduled to dock their Apollo spacecraft with the Soyuz, piloted by Alexei Leonov and Valery Kubasov. During docking and in subsequent meetings, the Apollo crewmen are supposed to speak Russian, while Leonov and Kubasov tackle English. In order to facilitate matters for those witnessing this memorable event, I'd like to explain some of the terms you might be hearing. The Russian word for docking is stikovka, but the actual docking interface is called a stick. If a secure dock is achieved, you might hear that the stick was well stuck during the stikovka. A stikovka takes place when the Apollo's docking module, or stikovachny modul, is mated with a docking ring attached to the Soyuz orbital module, or orbitalny modul. So far, so good. The device linking the two spacecraft is a simple but awesome-looking device called the Androgynous Peripheral Docking System, whose name in Russian is more awesome than the actual device, which is why the Androgini Perepelini Aggregat Stikovki is called APAS for short. If both spacecraft maintain their proper degree of kren, tangash, and riskanya, or roll, pitch, and yaw, then the docking should go harasho, or well. The gifted team of American teachers of Russian, under the direction of Anatoly Parasyenko, have prepared their American charge as well. But the true test will come if a mechanical malfunction causes the volatile docking module pilot Deke Slayton to come up with an appropriately expressive 4-letter Russian expletive. The unqualified success of this cultural exchange is threatened somewhat by the spoiled sport attitude of NASA and the Soviet Academy of Sciences, who banned from the flight both Jack Daniels and Stolichnoye vodka, fearing that more brain cells are likely to be destroyed by the imbibing of spirits than by highly charged cosmic particles. But the therapeutic uses of vodka for loosening the tongue are well known. Can anyone seriously imagine that it's possible to reduce linguistic inhibitions with dried apricots, grapefruit crystals, thermostabilized cranberry juice, and rehydrated cocoa? David, pass me that glass of irradiated rehydratable monosodium glutamate.
All right, Harry, and as I said just a few moments ago, everything is go for the stick at 11:15 this morning. I'm David Crane with Harry Walsh at the Johnson Space Center.
Of the hour, on the hour, from American Information Radio. This is John Grimes, and at this hour, the Apollo astronauts say they've spotted the Soyuz spaceship for the first time this morning. The Apollo astronauts now carrying out a series of 5 short rocket burns, moving Apollo up to rendezvous with the Russian Soyuz.
About 3 hours from now, Apollo will close the final gap and dock on the Soyuz spacecraft. Beginning at 3:06 Eastern Time this afternoon, you'll hear live coverage over many of these information network stations of the historic meeting in space of the astronauts and the cosmonauts.
We've just reestablished contact with the Soyuz spacecraft. They are beaming down television now.
The Soyuz craft has just been informed that the Apollo has performed its first burn. The Soyuz have given their position as just above the Black Sea at the present time. We are seeing a television picture at the present time on our monitors of Kubasov and Leonov on their consoles in the descent apparatus of the Soyuz.
Appears as if they're looking over some of their flight plans.
We're getting a little interference in English language now on the Soviet Mission Control Center. Presently, the Soyuz is located within the zone of visibility of tracking ship. It is carrying on its circular orbit. Leonov and Kubasov are located in the descent apparatus and located in the center of the aircraft.
And all appears to be going well at this point.
Yes, everything seems to be okay. The pictures are very good.
All right, let's switch over now to the American line. Soyuz through Apollo. Her first attempt at joint communications. No contact. That's American Capcom Dick Truly. Okay, that's Stafford and Slayton again checking out their communications link. They will make their initial attempt actually at communications between the two spacecraft at about 8:45 to 8:46. The docking itself not scheduled to take place until 11:15. The hardline communication between the two spacecraft will take place during the rendezvous phase, which will start at about 10:45 or so with the last burn, rocket burn from the Apollo craft coming at about 10:14. This will be the final burn to put it into a station-keeping maneuver. The actual docking will then begin at about 11:12 to 11:13. They will use the small steering rockets. They will be the Apollo will be the active craft to dock with the Soyuz spacecraft. Again, the main reason for this being that the Apollo craft is much more maneuverable than the Soyuz, although after the docking session of some 44 hours, they will undock and the Soyuz craft will have a go at docking with the Apollo craft. At this time, all appears to be going well. All appears to be going well aboard both spacecraft. This is David Crane with Harry Walsh at the Johnson Space Center.
They can have
Harry Walsh at the Johnson Space Center. We are continuing to pick up crosstalk between the two crews now. Harry?
David, what we're having right now is the linguistic equivalent to a Chinese fire drill. We have the Soyuz crew speaking in English, trying to communicate with the Apollo crew speaking in Russian. At the same time, we have public information. We have ground communicators speaking English and Russian at the same time. So we have the sort of four-way mix. At the present time, the communications between Apollo and Soyuz are not good, and they're trying to adjust the ranging so as to be able to communicate better.
I believe just a few moments ago they gave a distance.
Yes. I beg pardon, David?
They were giving a distance just a few moments ago between the spacecraft.
Yes. I don't remember exactly what it was. Do you recall?
I heard the term OCHA 12 or something like that.
I'm not sure. I did not hear it at the time.
The ranging that we picked up for a moment there, the Apollo spacecraft, Deke Slayton and Tom Stafford were speaking in Russian, contacting Soyuz and saying, tune in your range,
right.
Looking for the antenna or the finder that they will key in on for the final approach. Let's pick up the
next station in 30 minutes will be Santiago, Chile, and ATS-6 satellite again.
I believe, David, we just have a loss of signal.
Yeah, we've had loss of signal. We have up right now Terry White, the American public information commentator, confirming that fact with the loss of signal, and we're about 30 minutes away now. We have gotten into VHF arranging, though, and we have gotten the word here from Mission Control that things are looking good. We are coming up on our next scheduled burn on the rocket burn on the Apollo spacecraft at about in the next few minutes. As a matter of fact, that burn is supposed to take place during this loss of signal period. The next time we hear from them, they should be even closer. Two more slight rocket burns are scheduled, with the final rendezvous phase taking place between 10 and 11, with the docking still at 11:15. They have revised that now to 11:15:29. They are that close online. This is David Crane with Harry Walsh at the Johnson Space Center.
CBS News. Aboard both Apollo and Soyuz, all continues to go well as they move toward their rendezvous in space. This is Dallas Townsend reporting on the CBS Radio Network. The link-up is scheduled to take place a bit more than 2 hours from now at 12:15 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and Apollo is closing rapidly on the Soviet spacecraft. Steve Young reports from Moscow that they have now made contact.
Just over an hour ago, the Apollo astronauts reported that they could see the Soyuz spacecraft. Communications have been noisy. There was an exchange that went, "Hello, everybody. Good day. It's awfully early. Good morning." Through the hash, that sounded like one of the astronauts talking to Soviet flight engineer Valery Kubasov. In their communication with the astronauts, the cosmonauts are speaking English, and the astronauts speak Russian to the cosmonauts. In one conversation between Apollo and Houston, the faint voice of a Russian woman appeared suddenly. Houston concluded, "We were cut off by some interpreter." At one point, Commander Alexei Leonov said, "Apollo-Soyuz, I read you 3 by 3, speaking not only English, but with appropriate American slang." A short while ago, Soyuz turned on its beacon to make docking with Apollo easier later today. Steve Young, CBS News, Moscow.
CBS News continues after this message.
Crane with our Russian linguist, Harry Walsh at the Johnson Space Center, standing by for reacquisition of a signal with the Apollo spacecraft. Hopefully looking for a good burn.
Okay, Houston, this is Apollo. We just finished NSR. Residuals were all balls, plus all balls 1, minus all balls 1.
That's Vance Brand.
EMS is reading up, minus 12.8. On the GNN. We'll call the GNN match solution. Good attitude and on time. And would like to report that we can see Soyuz.
And confirmation here now on the other line from Mission Control. It was a successful burn, a co-elliptic maneuver. The Apollo spacecraft is now very easily within sighting distance of the Soyuz spacecraft. Harry Walsh, any word from the Soyuz spacecraft at this time?
Not yet. We haven't picked up acquisition of signal yet for the Soyuz. We just had a brief report from Moscow, merely giving the distance between the distance and relative position of Apollo and Soyuz.
All right. Did we get confirmation of the sighting from the Soyuz spacecraft of Apollo?
Yes, we did.
We're still looking then at a rendezvous procedure shortly beginning shortly after 10 o'clock. A docking to take place on time at 11:15. This is David Crane with Harry Walsh at the Johnson Space Center.
ASTP, an exercise in detente.
This is David Crane with Harry Walsh at the Johnson Space Center. We are in contact with the Apollo crew once again. They have their color TV camera turned on. They are passing over the southern tip of Africa. We are getting the audio and visual from the ATS-6 satellite that is some almost 21,000 miles. Should be almost directly over them right now. They're in about a 140-mile orbit. And Harry, I don't think I've ever seen Africa go by so fast.
No, it's probably square.
It was there for a moment. Also, we should note here that they are taking a break. Everything is going so well. The Apollo astronauts, we were just saw Tom Stafford sitting back with an orange drink. Any word on the Soyuz crew?
Well, we were just informed by Moscow that the crew of the Soyuz are taking what's called a личное время, personal time, before putting on their pressurized spacesuits.
And preparing for docking. Coming up within about a half hour will be the final rocket burn done by the Apollo crew. That'll start at about 10:10. This maneuver will put them into a station-keeping position. That'll be coming up at about 10:50. At 10:50, they should be approximately 50 feet and holding right above the Soyuz spacecraft. 20 minutes later, 20 to 25 minutes later, there should be a docking. Let's pick up some of the...
The docking attitude said on the next stage is nominal, no changes.
Nominal, no changes. That's Dick Truly, Capcom, telling the crew your go.
Okay, relay through Moscow to Soyuz that every time somebody comes on with a Apollo transmission on range is busting lock. Over.
Roger, we will do that. Thank you.
All right, that's Tom Stafford again with the communications problems. Did you catch that, Harry?
No,
Tom Stafford saying that every time that they try to contact the Soyuz, they are getting a break after the first few words. He's asking the Russian, our mission control room here to tell the Russian flight control team standing by here to coordinate its activities with its control team in Moscow to solve this problem. But again, we have had communication between the two spacecraft, and it's been reasonably good, I think. This is David Crane with Harry Walsh at the Johnson Space Center. Crane with Harry Walsh at the Johnson Space Center. We've just reestablished contact with the Soyuz spacecraft again. Harry, what is the first word?
Valery Kubasov was asked about the orientation vis-a-vis the Soyuz, and he said it was отлично and точно. It was excellent and perfect. He is presently working out a format, writing out a format with regard to the gyroscopes at the present time, but he says everything is in order as far as the orientation maneuvers and relationships are concerned, David.
All right, that is the last word we also had from the Apollo spacecraft. We've just lost our TV picture from the Apollo spacecraft on our monitors here, but the other monitor is showing a beautiful view of the Moscow Control Center, very similar to the control center here at the Johnson Space Center. And we are still looking good for a go for docking at about 11:15, now 11:15:25 later this morning. This is David Crane with Harry Walsh at the Johnson Space Center.
10 o'clock, KBUC, AM and FM San Antonio.
News of the hour, on the hour, from American Information Radio. This is John Grimes, and at this hour, Apollo and Soyuz now in rendezvous 140 miles above the Earth. About 2 hours ago, Apollo made its first eyeball contact with Soyuz, as astronaut Vance Brand told Houston.
We've got Soyuz to Sexton.
Hey, super. Have you got a good view of him, Vance?
He's just a speck right now.
This is Bill Larson, Apollo-Soyuz News Center. In less than 15 minutes, the Apollo astronauts will perform another key burn with their spaceship engines. This one, the final sequence that leads to rendezvous and docking with Soyuz in about an hour and 15 minutes. Right now, the two spaceships are about 30 miles apart. The Soviet cosmonauts are putting on their pressure suits to prepare for the docking. The U.S. astronauts will remain in their shirt sleeves for the entire operation. The historic handshakes in space set for about 3:15 this afternoon Eastern Time. Bill Larson, Apollo-Soyuz News Center.
Hear live coverage of the meeting in space beginning at 3:06 Eastern Time on many of these American Information Network stations. The GN.
We have just lost communications with the Apollo spacecraft. At this time, though, they should have successfully performed their last major burn, which consisted of no more than 0.8 of a second burn time remaining a rocket. This particular burn should put them above and ahead of the Soyuz spacecraft by some 2,000 feet. Station keeping should be coming up, what they call station keeping. They will be able to look back, see the Soyuz spacecraft. They will continue that phase for some 20 minutes before they ease about the Apollo command module and begin gently nosing in from the front to do the capture and the docking that should be taking place at about 11:15. Right before we lost signal, to give you some idea of the communications problems that perhaps we're not only experiencing here, but in mission control and aboard the Apollo spacecraft. We picked this up from Capcom Dick Truly talking with Tom Stafford.
This interference comes up and it's bothering you, let me let you know that it's not bothering me too much, so don't worry about me. But if it's bothering you so much, we think probably you could get rid of it on board by on panel 10, go and phone mic interconnect off, and then whoever's being bugged on their audio panel, turn it VHF, FM, and AM either off or volume full decrease.
Tom Stafford saying, okay, we'll try it. The problem they were having is that anytime they would attempt to communicate with mission control here, they were getting interference from the Soyuz spacecraft. But Harry, I don't think the problem is mutual, is it?
So far there seem to be no communication problems on board the Soyuz. We've lost signal at the present time. Shortly before losing signal, though, the Moscow ground communicator best wishes to the cosmonauts in 2 languages. In Russian, he told them, "Ni pucha, ni pera," a colloquial expression meaning good luck. And in English, he said, "We're holding our fingers," unquote.
And I think everybody out here is holding their fingers before the docking, which should be taking place in less than an hour now. The acquisition of signal with this all-important last 0.8 of a second burn with the Apollo spacecraft. We'll pick it up in about 25 minutes, and we'll come back on the air again then. This is David Crane with Harry Walsh at the Johnson Space Center. Crane with Harry Walsh at the Johnson Space Center. And we should be coming up on communications again. We should be coming up on communications again with the Apollo spacecraft with the next few seconds. This is the critical burn time. At this moment, they should be above and ahead of the Soyuz spacecraft. Dick Truly with Tom Stafford standing by on the burn time.
We'll be picking it up real time shortly here over that.
All right, Dick Truly with Stafford. They're looking at the television now. There was a successful burn time, 0.8 of a second. The Apollo spacecraft is now... All right, they are into the braking rockets. They are using the small quad rockets as braking rockets. They are almost at the station-keeping maneuver with the Soyuz spacecraft. Harry Walsh, any comment at this time from the Soyuz craft?
The Soyuz is not in communication right now. It's out of the zone of contact. We did receive a report from Moscow saying that the cosmonauts... Here we go.
Sorry. All right, there was a go from Dick Truly from Moscow. They said, we are all go. Tom Stafford.
Tom Stafford communicating with Valery Kubasov, I believe, at the present time. Stafford said he read him well, and the contact.
Again, they are in a station-keeping maneuver right now.
You can see his antennas from out here, Dick. Right there.
All right, Stafford talking with Capcom back here. The maneuver was successfully performed. They are in a station-keeping position, and we're still go for a dock on both sides now.
We'll see if we can get locked up on that.
Still go for a docking on both sides at 11:15. This is David Crane with Harry Walsh at the Johnson Space Center.
11 o'clock.
CBS News. The climactic moment of the Apollo-Soyuz mission is at hand. I'm Richard C. Hartelet reporting on the CBS radio network. In just under 15 minutes from now, America's Apollo and Russia's Soyuz will join in space. Reed Collins at CBS News Space Headquarters in New York is plugged in.
As the Apollo and Soyuz hurtled over South America at 137 miles altitude, Mission Control called Thomas Stafford, and Stafford in turn informed Alexei Leonov.
Moscow is go for docking. Houston is go for docking. It's up to you guys. Have fun.
All righty, sounds good. Follow me, there'll be the Alexei. Roger. Houston, meters. Smile. Ocean Horror Show.
Stafford's Ocean Horror Show, very good to Leonov, who said the Soyuz is ready. And in a few minutes over West Germany, Stafford will ease the docking pedal onto the passive Soyuz, and history will be written. This is Reed Collins, CBS News, Space Headquarters, New York.
Earlier, as Apollo drew near, Soyuz told ground control it was preparing for the rendezvous. We cooked some borscht, said Alexei Leonov, and we put up slogans, "Welcome to Soyuz." More CBS News after this.
From a historic moment, a docking of two foreign spacecraft in space. On our monitor here at the Johnson Space Center, we can see the docking module from the TV camera from the Apollo spacecraft, and it is slowly closing with the Soyuz spacecraft. The conversations you hear, the Russian is our astronauts, the English are the cosmonauts. Okay, that was Leonov with the engine comment.
We hear you very well, said Stafford.
There's nothing we can do here. That's from down there.
Docking rapidly approaching. Less than 5 meters, says Leonov.
Only 1 meter to go. Only 1 meter separates the two craft at the present time. Getting very close to the dock. The dock contacted.
Dock and captured. Comment from Leonov, then we have you. From the mission control rooms in Moscow and here at the Johnson Space Center. Astronaut Capcom Dick Truly commenting, we have a good picture.
Now are linked in a soft dock position. The petals are ready to close and to draw the spacecraft each to the other. Tom Stafford has done it in what was really jig time a little bit earlier than he'd expected to. The space headquarters in Houston and its counterpart near Moscow are alive with people applauding, and they see the same picture being transmitted from the spacecraft that we do. Let's go aloft and listen to some of the conversation.
It's still a little bit too bright while you were fooling around with it, though. We did get you were closed down a little more than you are now. And we've got all the events. We're following you on the ground. You're looking real good. We copied Alexei seeing you're holding hands, and we see it too.
Soyuz, Apollo, Soyuz to Apollo. Initiating retraction. Houston, Apollo.
Go ahead, Tom.
Go greet the professor will show you at the Mayaki Stakhovka. It was a soft docking.
Stafford with a message to Busheya, the mission director in Moscow. We get some interpretation, but it's a little bit difficult. Mission control 9,800 miles away from the control center near Moscow. And the spacecraft, the center objects of the world's attention now midway in between, hurtling on toward the Soviet land mass. They're cocked really at an angle of 60 degrees to the local vertical. That's so the ATS-6 satellite can be used as a communication relay, and it's doing that, sending down the picture which is being taken from the window. Leonov and Kubasov don't have that forward-looking window. They have to peer out a little periscope that gives them a forward look. There are no front-end windows on their Soyuz.
Активные замки закрыты. Both active hooks. Stakhovka выполнена. Docking completed. Docking is completed, Houston.
They're hard docked.
Well done, Tom. It was a good show. They're looking forward now to second-hand vision.
Now and again you hear an Очень хорошо, very fine, and the Americans are speaking Russian. The Russians, when they can think about it, are speaking American, but not all of the time.
To you and Valery. Good time.
Now, my colleague, correspondent Steve Young, is at the CBS News Space Headquarters in Moscow. And Steve, what's the view from there of this signal event?
Well, we remain flight director at Kaliningrad, about 25 miles from downtown Moscow in our press center. Alexei is glancing now down at his flight book, which is open before him. He looks a little less excited now than he did just a couple of minutes ago. But he's just taken off his headset. He has a look of satisfaction. And just behind him is a rank of ranking Soviet technicians. They have a kind of amphitheater at the Soviet Mission Center. And a large round of applause and back slapping and hand shaking went on a couple of minutes ago here, as it did in Houston.
Well, the Houston thing seems to be very excited. This was a moment to which they had all worked and worked very hard. We're listening to some of the communication from aloft. We don't really hear a great deal of hash in it, but we're getting the message back up to Deke. Let's go back to the air-to-ground conversation a little bit here.
Okay.
Some of it's good, some of it's bad, as the astronauts speak Russian to the Russians, speak English to the ground, and the Soviets reverse that process. Flying along, there's a little movement in the monitor. You can't really tell what the source of that is. Can you hear me? Bad comm was the response. They asked their friends in the Soyuz if it was possible for them to be heard, and we're getting very hashy responses back and forth. One of the things Mission Control has been concerned with is really the type of picture that what sort of photos the camera is redelivering at that historic moment.
So we hear a very hashy conversation. Some of the work has been involved with the changing of the aperture of the television camera lens. And we're hearing communication from all sides. This was sort of anticipated. This is the problem with détente when you have two vastly different systems of language.
Reed, if I could add a note, as you know, of course, the Soviets for years have been secretive about the family affairs of their cosmonauts, but I ran into a gentleman just a few minutes ago who is a official at Star City, the training center of the cosmonauts. He tells me that Commander Leonov's wife, Svetlana, and the daughters Victoria and Oksana, and Kubasov's wife, Ludmila, and their daughters, Katya and Dima, are watching this right now on a large television screen in a special viewing room in Star City.
In Star City, which is how far from the actual control center is that? That's where everybody lives, is in the program, isn't it?
Well, it's about 25 miles from downtown Moscow, and Kaliningrad is about 28, but in a slightly different direction.
Everything's pretty well spread out there, Steve, isn't it? What's the Muscovite think of all this? Do you get a chance to sample any public opinion in there?
Well, yes, I did. As you know, this is the first Russian launch which has been broadcast live, and I don't think the average citizen sees the implications of that. Many people in the West, of course, have thought for years that the Russians might not have announced their failures, but to a Russian, it doesn't make much difference if this is live versus playback after the fact. But most people are very, very enthusiastic about this mission. They're echoing what they've read in their newspaper for days now and seen on television. They take it as a sign of détente, and they take that to be a very good thing.
Very good. Steve, of course, the next procedure is to check out and make sure you have good integrity with the docking module that is the link now between the two spacecraft. And pretty soon, Deke Slayton will have to go into the module and prepare the way for Tom Stafford, who will become the first fellow who actually gets to see one of his tovarishchi who's in the other spacecraft. And he and Leonov will get together later this afternoon. It's almost an unbelievable feat, isn't it, Steve, if you really consider it? We have a minute and a half to go here.
I was struck with something, Reed, a little earlier this afternoon, preparing for this broadcast and some other broadcasts. I happened to glance up, and at one side was a television monitor labeled USSR Academy of Science, which roughly corresponds to our civilian NASA program, and it was showing us live from space two cosmonauts. And to the right of it was a TV set marked Houston, and it was showing us live from space three Apollo astronauts. I think that must be the first time that there have been two such simultaneous live broadcasts.
It is a day of firsts, no question about it, Steve Young in Moscow. And the first big event of this first day of détente has taken place successfully. The two spacecraft have rendezvoused, the American Apollo doing the propulsive systems, the Soyuz waiting passively, rolling over 60 degrees to acquire the ATS-6 satellite, a United States creature which is hanging high above Kenya, Africa now, relaying all the messages and the TV pictures back to Earth. And then the docking taking place first softly as those two petal systems, the mutually adaptable systems, came together. Finally, the latches began to click shut, and a significant sort of event had taken place. The shadow of it, of course, is streaking around the world. We can't tell really what sort of shadow it will cast finally on our lives below, but at least aloft, the attempt to get two differing systems and two different languages together has been made, and it has been successful. For now, this is continuing coverage of Apollo-Soyuz, the meeting in space. Reed Collins, CBS News, Space Headquarters, New York.
San Antonio. News of the hour on the hour from American Information Radio. This is John Grimes, and at this hour, the great space chase is over. The Apollo and Soyuz spaceships now locked firmly together, some 139 miles up. As astronauts Stafford, Brand, and Slayton inched the Apollo in for link-up with Leonov and Kubasov in Soyuz about 45 minutes ago, the Moscow Space Center translated.
1 meter. Yeah. Contact. Capture. We also have capture. We have succeeded. Everything is excellent.
This is Vic Ratner. Almost everything is excellent. The two link-ups between the two ships are going smoothly, but Apollo Commander Tom Stafford reported a bad smell in his ship, like burned glue, he said, which burns the eyes a little. The smell eased up in a few minutes, and Mission Control reported it is not concerned about the odor, but at least one astronaut has been told to put on his oxygen mask just in case. Vic Ratner, ABC News, Apollo-Soyuz News Center.
And you'll hear live coverage of the first meeting of the U.S. and Russian spacemen beginning at 3:06 p.m. Eastern Time on many of these information network stations.
All right, the docking did not take place as scheduled. As a matter of fact, it occurred several minutes before the actual flight time was scheduled, some 6 minutes before. Apparently, Deke Slayton and Tom Stafford were most anxious. They were on a good line of sight, and it came off without a hitch. A beautiful docking. Shortly after that, though, as you had mentioned, an acrid smell once they opened the docking module. But we've just received word here from Mission Control, although they're not positive what it is, they are now conjecturing that it came from one of the experiments, as we had been speculating for the last half hour, ever since we heard Stafford make that comment, that it came from one of the experiments that they were performing yesterday. As you may have heard, they had been using a furnace and a freezer, other devices in the docking module, and they believe that probably the furnace was in contact with a piece of Velcro or something like that. The docking module has been closed since then, and it's very possible that the docking module just needed a little bit of an airing out. But the oxygen masks have been removed for some time now. There have been no further reports, and Mission Control here does not think that it's a serious problem or anything to worry about. The next procedure now is the thorough docking module checkout. The astronauts, Tom Stafford and Deke Slayton, are not scheduled to be inside the Soyuz spacecraft until approximately 2:15, 2:20 this afternoon. The docking, though, was something else again. Truly a spectacular sight that we can view on our monitors out here. Considerable confusion because of all of the lines, the communications. There were 5, 6 people talking at once in 2 different languages. The lines of communications between the 2 spacecraft, the spacecraft, their mission controls, and the lines of communications between the mission controls, constantly updating themselves as to the situation. Not long after dawn, of which there was a great outburst of enthusiasm from Leonov of great, wonderful, beautiful, good docking. Good docking is very great. I specifically recall that. A few moments after that, I believe the flight engineer, Harry, had an opportunity to make a few comments.
Yes, we have a tape of that. It was made, David, shortly after the docking was completed. Kubasa was describing the docking to the Mission Control in Moscow. We were at approximately 100 meters distance. We were maintaining our orientation at approximately 50 meters. At the time of the approach, we were over the Atlantic Ocean. We had to remain in stable configuration and to keep our position. The Apollo had to make the orientation maneuvers. At 7:30 p.m., we made the final orientation for docking. The Soyuz had to maintain its prolonged position and make the necessary rolling movements. Following the maneuver, the Apollo approached the docking. The distance lessened to 10 meters. We came closer. We were several meters away, and then finally the power was cut on. We linked up. After several seconds, their American astronaut Vance Brand laid in the power, and we had contact of the 2 spacecraft.
Kubasov describing the docking procedure to his mission control several minutes after the docking. I believe most of the communications that we were able to hear from here, as we expected in English from the Russian crew, came from Leonov.
Most of the communication did. However, shortly after we heard Kubasa cutting in several times.
Once again, the scheduled greeting, the hand clasp in space between Tom Stafford and the commander of the Soyuz spacecraft, Alexei Leonov, will take place at about 2:15. We'll be back with a description of that docking module and how this event will take place in just a moment. A brief description of the docking module. The module will be used to transfer the two crews, and of course the module absolutely essential because of the differences in pressure of the two spacecraft. The pressure, the atmosphere of the Apollo command module is at 5 psi pure oxygen. That of the Soyuz spacecraft are normally 14.7 of oxygen and nitrogen. The two just will not mix, so the docking module was necessary. It will act as an airlock. The Soyuz spacecraft, the Russians had agreed some 2 years ago to drop their pressure to 10 psi. Apparently, NASA officials thought this a good enough idea that this is the atmosphere that will be used aboard the space shuttle flights later on in this decade. The module itself is some 10 feet 4 inches long, at 4 feet 8 inches in diameter. Weight wasn't much of a factor. It weighs 4,436 pounds, but this wasn't much of a consideration considering it went up in the S-4B stage, so weight not the primary consideration there. Deke Slayton has a nickname for the docking module. He's the docking module pilot, and he prefers to name it the sewer pipe.
David, I'm very pleased the docking went as well as it would. I had some misgivings last evening when somebody stated that the astronauts had been asked how tall they were. I had visions of them not being able to get through the thing.
And I think that some of those comments, I don't know, Harry, but I seem to be, I don't know why, but I'm a little bit surprised at this sense of humor that being displayed by the cosmonauts, because from what we were led to believe that they're usually given a very stern a set of orders and not much of an airplay along these lines.
I think so, but under the circumstances, I think we have to take into consideration the fact that for much of this flight, the Soyuz the Soyuz spaceship was in a passive mode, and they didn't really have all that much to do with regard to maneuvering or orientation, ranging, or almost anything. They sort of stayed in orbit and received for the last couple of days.
Well, it's quite obvious that both crews are extremely happy. Mission control here and in Moscow, extremely pleased. Immediately after the docking, our screens here showed pictures from both sides, everybody standing up and applauding, shaking hands. Again, the first crew transfer, Tom Stafford, Deke Slayton, will take place at about 2:15, 2:20 this afternoon. There will be the handshake, and then formal greetings from the Soviet leaders. We'll speak to the crews inside the Soyuz spacecraft, and at approximately 2:30, we've been told by Mission Control here that President Ford will speak to the astronauts and cosmonauts. This is David Crane with Harry Walsh at the Johnson Space Center. Very successful docking. The first Apollo-Soyuz crew transfer is to take place within an hour and a half, and several gifts will be exchanged. I'm David Crane at the Johnson Space Center. Back with details in just a moment. At 2:10 this afternoon, astronauts Tom Stafford and Deke Slayton are scheduled to join cosmonauts Alexei Leonov, Valery Kubasov, and the Soyuz spacecraft. Several gift exchanges will be made, including the U.S., USSR flags, plus the U.S. flag, another U.S. flag to be turned here, and another USSR flag that will be returned to that country. A United Nations flag is also being flown. It will be given to our astronauts astronauts to be returned here. It was flown aboard the Soyuz. It symbolizes the common goal of people exploring space for the benefit of people all over the world. One of the more interesting of the gifts to be exchanged won't be necessarily so much of as an exchange as also an experiment, the lead gold alloy. 3 samples using gold and lead from both countries will be alloyed in the electric furnace aboard the docking module. The uniform mixing of such unlike materials in space is going to create a new substance which would symbolize the success people and nations have found in putting aside their differences to work together in space. Also, there will be commemorative plaques, commemorative medallions, also 6 copies of the agreement concerning cooperation in the exploration and use of outer space for peaceful purposes, which was signed by then President Richard Nixon and Premier Alexei Kosygin in May of 1972. And during these proceedings, shortly after they do enter the Soyuz spacecraft, Soviet leaders, and we expect Leonid Brezhnev or Kosygin to speak to the cosmonauts and the astronauts as they are aboard the Soyuz at approximately 2:23 this afternoon, and at 2:30 this afternoon, President Ford is scheduled to talk to the astronauts and cosmonauts. This is David Crane at the Johnson Space Center.